All right, we're live. Let's get right into it. Bring it to Megyn Kelly about the explosion of the Democratic Party and the going down of president, which won't be president for long, Biden.
Rescued the dog and named him Delta. Sadly, Delta was just one of the animals that needed help. And this inspired Leo to start Delta Rescue, the largest no kill, care for life animal sanctuary. Grow your estate while letting your love for animals live well into the future. A pair of interviews with two Black radio hosts in Pennsylvania, one of whom has now been fired, both of whom have now admitted that they just asked the questions the White House provided them. And frankly, I can tell you right here from this seat, the same is true of Morning Joe. Guaranteed. It was rehearsed. It was understood between them exactly where they'd go with this interview. And the choreography of the whole thing was set between the sitting president and his BFFs posing as some sort of journalistic figures over at MSNBC this morning. Stu, what do you make of it?
Fascinating stuff. I mean, this has been one of the most incredible week or two periods that I can ever remember in politics. I mean, the debate performance was one of the most catastrophic things I've ever seen in politics for a candidate. And now this fallout, which has been amazing, everything from the media completely changing and morphing into like this group of people that actually like hold, a president on the Democratic side to account. All of a sudden, they're doing their scattered showers of journalism all over the place, which has been fascinating to watch. And of course, the Morning Joe thing is just hilarious. Just a couple of months ago, Joe Scarborough was on the air saying, this guy is not only cogent, but he's the best he's ever been. He was saying that it was a conspiracy theory, that they kept underestimating him at their own peril. Then it seemed for a couple of days, I guess, that he was supposed to be, it was really bad performance, and maybe he should be thinking about his legacy. And then today he seems to be back on the bandwagon. I mean, the man seems to have absolutely no beliefs that are actually real other than what will get him more conversations at a cocktail party.
Talking about
He seems to have no soul. The way that because there's this thing that happens when normal humans communicate with each other, Megyn, which is when you're saying something that you know to be a blatant lie, you feel this internal level of shame. You feel uncomfortable doing it. Most people feel this. Joe Scarborough has mastered the skill to not feel any shame whatsoever when he says blatantly untrue things that disagree with each other moments apart. It is a parlor trick I didn't know anyone had, but in reality, it's disgusting.
And we have this put together, Stu. So Joe Scarborough, this morning in his interview with the president, if you hear the questions, he goes on like the elites, the politicians, the press, they're calling for you to step out of this race. These people who think they know better. You're one of them, you dishonest dumbass. To your point, Stu, listen, we put together his, just this past couple of weeks, evolution and back Scarborough's on Joe Biden. All right, here he is. You'll hear the SOT montage where initially he's talking about how Joe Biden's the greatest ever, best he's ever been. And then after the debate, how he sounded. And then a few days went by and he reversed messaging again. And now he's out there pretending he wasn't one of the ones calling for Biden to step down. Listen.
He's far beyond cogent. In fact, I think he's better than he's ever been. He spent much of the night with his mouth agape and his eyes darting back and forth. I fear Donald Trump will be the next president of the United States unless things change, and tragically did not rise to the occasion. And now is a good time. In June, thank God, in June, and not October, in June, this is the last chance for Democrats to decide whether this man we've known and loved for a very long time is up to the task. Let's take a deep breath. And let's understand it's only July the 5th. Such an historic decision should not be made in haste.
Democrats have no heart. They lie their asses off and don't care not one bit about this country.
It's unbelievable, Stu, right? I thank God we know in June. You know what? Actually, it's only July. Like, don't make the decision in haste. Anything could happen. He could turn this whole thing around.
I really do think it's incredible. If we should all remember here too, that when it felt like the right thing to do to be buddies with Donald Trump, that's also what he was. He was bringing him on television,
licked them
licked the boots on
openly
a
every
daily
morning.
basis. Yeah, brought him on. They went to each other's weddings and like hung out and were buddies, to the extent that even off the air, leaked video showed that he was basically asking Donald Trump what questions he wanted to be asked. The same thing these poor reporters and radio hosts got fired for this weekend, he was doing to Donald Trump. And now he's completely reversed himself multiple times because whatever benefits Joe Scarborough on that day is what he says. That's who the guy is. He's one of the lowest forms in the entire media and has been his entire life.
So, Dave, as interesting as Scarborough's hypocrisy and lies are, the president's are far more interesting. And here he was sounding more vibrant this morning than he has over the past weekend and several years, trying to convince us that he is staying in this race and that really the focus should be on Trump's terrible performance at the debate. Satu.
And I'm not lost. I haven't lost. I beat him last time. I'll beat him this time. And this is a guy who, look, we talk about debate. Look at his performance at debate. He lied over, Trump has 50 lies. I mean, look, this is a guy who says 10% of the universe. I don't want to get into that. He's just a liar. And he hasn't done a damn thing since the debate. He's been riding around in a golf cart for 10 days down in Mar-a-Lago talking with his wealthy friends. I'm not running because of these guys, Joe. I'm running because, and you know me well enough to know this from the very beginning, I ran because I never bought on in the trickle-down economic theory. I never bought into the notion that we have to walk away from the rest of the world and cave to Putin or anybody else. I've never believed any of that. And I'm confident that's where the American people are. So what I did was I went out and I wanted to make sure that there wasn't any slippage at all. And with the average voter, I don't care what the millionaires think.
Okay. So it's amazing, Dave, that he's calling attention to the fact that Trump's been silent for 10 days, which is the most disciplined Donald Trump has ever shown in his life. It's exactly the right move. He's trying to bait him into saying something so he can shift the story off of himself.
Yeah, no, Trump has played this very well, including the night of the debate. But listen, I'm so frustrated by all of this. And I talk to so many Americans who are so deeply frustrated because we are watching right now why nobody trusts politicians, why nobody trusts pundits. We all watched that debate. We know what we saw. It wasn't a close call. That was a senile man, at least on the edge of dementia, who is absolutely unfit to be the president of the United States. There is no question about that. We all knew it. Our jaws were on the floor. But by the next morning, all of the politicians and all of the pundits were saying to themselves, all right, how do we spin this? How do we describe this? Because, well, the Republicans, they don't think he's fit for office, but they'd rather run against him. And the Democrats, they don't mind the deep state running things, but now they're worried he might lose. And the American people are watching all of this and they're saying, you people don't give a shit about us. You don't give a shit about the country. You're worried about maintaining power. So let me try to break this cycle. Joe Biden is not fit to be president of the United States on July 8th, 2024. I don't care if it helps the Democrats, the Republicans, the Libertarians. He's not fit to be president, and everybody ought to just be able to say that. It's infuriating.
I totally agree with you on every word. It's infuriating that he gets to remain president between now and January, no matter what happens. You're right. He's not fit. This person cannot be the president. There are more gaffes even this weekend, which we're going to show the audience, but I want to go through those sequentially because it's just easier to digest that way. He got out there not only on Morning Joe this morning, but he had this sit down with George Stephanopoulos, the big sit down. ABC News initially was going to release a little bit on their evening program on Friday night with David Muir. Then they were going to release some with Stephanopoulos on his Sunday show. And then the big kahuna was going to be this morning on Good Morning America. Well, that didn't happen because he only sat there for 22 minutes. And you can't make 3 programs out of a 22-minute interview with the president. And so they released the whole 22 minutes on Friday. And it was another disaster. He was incoherent. Once again, as we saw during the debate, he could not
Watch
finish
this.
a sentence. He kicked off with this, where he's not even sure whether he watched the debate on television after it happened or not. SOT 5.
Your friend Nancy Pelosi actually framed the question I think is on the minds of millions of Americans. Was this a bad episode or the sign of a more serious condition?
It was a bad episode. Not accused of any serious condition. I was exhausted.
And did you ever watch the debate afterwards?
I don't think I did, no.
What is that, Dave?
Listen, Joe Biden wouldn't know if he was watching Matlock half an hour ago. I mean, that's what it means. I mean, that's all that it can mean. Look, I think you've made a very good point of, about Joe Biden's role in this, right? Now we know that the great intellectual Hunter Biden is the primary advisor and gatekeeper to the president of the United States right now. They've admitted that he can only actually function between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. I mean, this is turning into a Monty Python sketch. It's a level of absurdity that I don't think I've seen before. But I will say this: it reminds me of COVID in a sense. One of the things I stressed in my book was that it was horrible that COVID happened during an election year. It was the worst possible timing because as soon as there started to be a difference of approach in the summer, right? And DeSantis is saying maybe we can open up, and Cuomo's saying no, we can't. Everyone got into their political silos, and we were just not able to have a rational conversation. And I feel like that's happening here, and we're just stuck in this cycle. I feel like if we had the moon landing today, by the next morning, both sides would be arguing over whether it really happened or did it really matter or is it worth getting excited over. We just don't share the same reality.
Yeah, and you speak of elder abuse. That's how I see what's happening now. I tweeted out over the weekend, this is infuriating because what you have here is a critical wounded horse. And instead of, I'm not saying putting him down, but instead of caretaking the horse, they're making him run again. The cruelest stable owners wouldn't put the horse back out there to watch him die on the track or take a split bone and turn it into a massive compound fracture of a femur, right? Like that's what they're doing right now, saying just run, just keep running, get out there. And that's why he gives answers like, I'm not sure if I've watched the debate. I'm not sure. As he just pointed out, it happened a week ago. A week. It was 8 days when he sat down with Stephanopoulos, and he doesn't remember. Here was another, he kept saying, no excuses, no one's fault but mine. But then he kept making excuses for why he performed so poorly. And the latest was Trump was yelling, even though the mics were cut. SOT 6.
How quickly did it come to you that you were having that bad night?
Well, Kane was having a bad night when I
Watch
realized
this
that
one. Watch
even when
this.
I was answering a question, even when I turned his mic off, he was still shouting. And I let it distract me. I'm not blaming it on that. But I realized that I just wasn't in control.
It's maybe the next
Stephanopoulos
clip.
followed up by
Next
saying,
clip is
some of this
bad.
began your confusion even before Trump weighed in. And he just didn't have an answer. He didn't, because there is no answer. It wasn't Trump's yelling. It wasn't the mics. Again, in this interview, he said I was exhausted. Last week, at the end of the week, he said it was my travel schedule. Jet lag, we've heard. Overprepared with details. He raised that again. None of that was the answer. And everyone knows it, Stu. I mean, that's the problem he's up against. He can say everything he wants here. And the only question is, who's going to go along with it because they want the gaslighting to continue because they still believe in him? And who's not, either because, like us, they don't think he's qualified to hold his position, or because, like the Democrats who want to win, they realize he can't do it. and they just love him or hate him. They know they need to get him out of there unless, in order to hold on to control of the White House.
Yeah, I mean, and the sad thing is, I think if you go the week period from the debate to that interview, the interview was the best moment for him. I think, it was horrible, but it was, I guess, better than the debate. When we were doing live coverage on Blaze TV of the debate, and it ended, and I couldn't even think of what to say. It was jaw dropping. I'd never seen anything like it. And in any sane society, obviously, he would not be president. My first thought coming out of that coverage was, good God, I have kids who live in this country, that this man is in charge of managing in some way. I mean, you start thinking about, are my kids going to wind up getting blown up because of a mistake he makes? We've got
He's the leader of our military. He's the commander-in-chief of our military.
Yeah, it is I think the biggest threat to our entire globe right now is the fact that we have this guy as president managing the situation between Ukraine and Russia. God only knows how that spirals out of control. He keeps telling them that we're sending them more and more arms that go deeper and deeper to their territory, crossing his own red lines. It's a whole other topic, but it's very, very disconcerting. But I think when you go back to whether he's going to try to hold on to power, number one, do give some of the blame to Joe Biden. Yes, he is the racehorse, as you pointed out, that is limping very heavily. And so it is sad to watch. But this man has wanted this power since at least 1972. It's all he's thought about. He has wanted to be this man, and I don't think he has any intent of giving it up himself, whatever coherent moments he has during the day. And yes, you have Joe Biden and Hunter Biden. Hunter may have a little bit of interest having his dad be ahead of the DOJ right now. Of course, he's going to argue for him to stay in. But it's not just them. I mean, look at the people around him. You think Antony Blinken has a good job after this is over? I mean, you think everyone's like, oh, wow, I can't wait to hire Antony Blinken. Does Corinne Jean-Pierre have a gig outside of Applebee's when this is over? It's over for these people. What else are they going to do but argue, stay in power, because all of their life is justified by this man having power.
So
they have nothing
Can I
else
follow up
of
with you on
value.
that? There's a report in Politico about, which is, I have to say, doing a great job on this. They have reasons, as you know, to be covering this story aggressively. Where were you when the rest of us were doing it? In any event, about how that meeting he had last week with the Democratic governors, and after he had that meeting, try to assuage concerns. And by the way, at that meeting, the governors of New Mexico and Maine told him, you're going to lose our states. Our states are now in jeopardy. These are not swing states. These are blue states. And all the news reported, those two governors stood up and said, they're in jeopardy, sir, as a result of you. Anyway, you didn't have a flow of Democratic governors coming out and saying he's got to step down after that meeting. And you know why? Political reporting. It's because they want to run. They all see themselves as the next Democratic presidential candidate in 4 years. And so they don't want a young, potentially two-term Democrat winning other than Joe Biden right now. They'd much rather put the racehorse out there and let him limp through another 4 years, and then they can emerge as the saviors 4 years from now. It's craven how little these people love America. They only love themselves still.
That is 100% true. And it's important to understand their motivation. I mean, I think you mentioned Politico, which I was looking at the Politico homepage the day after the debate. I couldn't believe it. I mean, it was harder on Joe Biden than, I don't know, Breitbart is on a daily basis. The New York Times, looks like the Blaze and Daily Wire. Like, I don't know where this has come from. And actually, I do know, of course, where it's come from, which is they now, for this short period, believe that doing actual journalism is the right thing to do because they believe Trump is going to win. They believe that this is their opportunity to get him out. And I promise you, the second they cannot have a replacement, the second that is out of the picture, they will switch back. They will all of a sudden start talking about, actually, he's starting to be more coherent in these meetings. Actually, we're getting reports that this is turning around. Maybe it was just a bad night. They will reverse themselves and act like none of this ever happened if he stays in and survives the next couple of weeks. They will basically go on the air and say that, President Biden, who promised to cure cancer, must have come up with a cure for Alzheimer's instead, because he's now magically in control of all of his faculties. They will reverse themselves. It is kind of weird, though, to live in this world where kind of journalists are doing what they're supposed to do.
Yeah.
I mean, they seem to be
I
honest.
love how they're pretending
forward.
like, gee, we just stumbled upon this story, which was being covered up by the White House. And so here we are in earnest now, ready to cover it. I mean, there's a nugget of truth in there, Dave. There has been a massive cover up at the White House, for sure. They've been masking just how bad the problem is. But all of us on the screen right now have been covering Joe Biden's obvious struggles with dementia. It's not a medical diagnosis, it's just a layperson's observation for years. And it's been ignored by all these same people who are like, oh, cover up. Meanwhile, I want you to respond to that, but I do want to get back to the elder abuse line, because that's how this feels. Yes, he's ambitious. Yes, he's the most, aggressively political person in his circle. But when someone becomes infirm, personally, I give them a longer leash, because it's up to the family members when that happens to step in. That's why you can go in and you get power of attorney when this happens to a parent or a grandparent. You say to the court, I love my mom, my dad, my grandma, but they're no longer capable of making decisions. And so please give me the power to make the decisions for them. And the courts do it regularly because they understand that person, while they may have many moments of lucidity, overall, they've lost the capacity to make big decisions for themselves. That's why the family's more culpable here. Michael Moore, of all people, who literally today was calling Donald Trump the devil, made a similar point on, I think it was a podcast interview. Take a listen. Stop for.
I have to be the only one to stand for Joe Biden. That's right. That's me. You heard me say that. I have to be the only one to stand up for Joe Biden here to protect him from the cruelest form of elder abuse I've ever been forced to watch. Well, then that's what I'll do. He was in epic distress that Thursday night. Every cognitive default in his mind seemed to be shutting down. If this had been somebody that you truly cared about, loved, embraced, what would you have done?
Yeah, that was Rumble with Michael Moore. It's his podcast. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, I mean, look, the question of what we knew about Biden's condition is tricky, because the White House actually did do a pretty effective job of shielding the worst of it, it seems. It also may have gotten progressively much worse very quickly. Yeah. We don't know. But it's almost like the mafia, right? Like, we all knew, apologies to Carol Markowitz, the mafia doesn't exist. We all knew the mafia existed, right? But until the commission case, we didn't have the evidence. We really couldn't prove it, right? This would be like if John Gotti had walked into a restaurant and murdered 25 people on camera. It just became completely obvious that this was real. And I think the Democrats and the media ultimately have the same dilemma, which is that it's probably going to happen again. So I think Stu's right that the liberal media would be perfectly willing to reverse themselves, and somehow the New York Times and the Chicago Tribune, if Biden stays in the race, are going to endorse him, even though they already called for him to leave, right? Somehow they're going to square that circle. But the real question is, if they do that, and it does happen again, because it will happen again, will there start to be consequences? Are we already starting to see consequences, right? Is the economic failure of CNN and MSNBC owing to the fact that the American people just aren't buying it anymore? And it seems like CNN in particular, every time they try to fix it, they just revert back to the same Trump-hating, Brian Stelter-loving thing that they've been since the golden escalator. I don't understand it. I think
that's how
Scott
they're going to do
Jennings,
it.
A couple people.
That's how they're going to do it, Dave. They're going to, if Biden stays in, there'll be a day of, okay, you were against it, but that's his decision. He's got the delegates.
Yeah, but then what? But Megyn,
and then,
why do you do that?
but wait, and then the whole remaining period, however, I mean, it's going to, at most, it's going to be 3 months, will be about how evil Trump is. That's it. Just Biden won't be the story. it'll just be Trump is the devil. It'll be he's the devil. And therefore, and I have to tell you, I was talking to a Democrat friend of mine over the weekend who I love, a wonderful woman. She's not particularly political, but she votes Democrat. And I was asking her what she thinks about all this. And she's like, I don't really care if it's presidency by group. Like, that's fine. As long as they keep enacting the policies I like. It's going fine so far. It's certainly better than with Trump. Like, whoever's around him is doing things I like. So yeah, I'm still going to vote for him. I think there are a lot of Democrats who feel that way.
Yeah, no, I agree. I don't think there's enough. I think ultimately, especially more independent-leaning Democrats and independents themselves want a president of the United States because, I thought one of the points Trump made in the debate, and I know that nobody paid any attention to anything other than Joe Biden's vacant stare during the debate, but there was one moment when Trump said to Biden, "You don't fire anybody. You never fire anybody." And it was absolutely true, right? Jake Sullivan said, 10 days before October 7th that the Middle East hadn't been that quiet in decades? He's still got his job. Mayorkas still has his job. What do you have to do to get fired by the Biden administration? So I think that's actually something that Trump should continue to hammer, because if the Democrats are going to say, oh, it's president by committee, well, the committee also sucks.
Yeah. Did you see that photo tweeted out over the weekend of President Biden's speech writing team?
Oh my God.
My
I just want to buy those kids like a carton of cigarettes and a bottle of bourbon or something. Like, how can this be?
They're still in the acne phase of puberty. It looks like a Columbia University.
You guys see that photo? It's a bunch of kids. What a ridiculous administration. It's time for him to go.
Struggle session live and in the White House. It's terrifying. We'll put it on the board for the YouTube audience.
There's two of them in the corner doing work. I think they're filling out resumes. It's unbelievable.
Well, and Karine Jean-Pierre is in the background. She's their boss, which makes a lot of sense. Now I totally understand. Like this, okay, that makes perfect sense to me.
Have you seen this, Stu?
I don't think I've seen the photo. I mean, it makes perfect sense, but I have not actually seen
truly,
it.
if there's somebody there over the age of 24, it'll be a miracle. They've got of course, all the racial and gender or whatever boxes are checked. And I guarantee you these people know nothing, absolutely nothing about anything other than woke, diversity, DEI type issues. I want to get to this because to me, one of the things that's been really jarring about listening to Joe Biden speak is you cannot finish a thought or a sentence. And our audience is going to hear this repeatedly during some of the sound bites that we pulled for today, because this is a problem. He's the leader of the free world. And here's just one example. This is right at the top of the interview with Stephanopoulos. Listen to him.
The whole way I prepared, nobody's fault of mine. Nobody's fault of mine. I prepared what I usually would do, sitting down as I did come back with foreign leaders or the National Security Council for explicit detail. And I realized about partway through that, although I get quoted, the New York Times had me down at 10 points before the debate, 9 now or whatever the hell it is. The fact of the matter is that what I looked at is that he also lied 28 times. The way the debate ran, not my fault, no one else's fault. No one else's fault.
He didn't answer not one question. He went from one subject to another subject to another subject. I want to replay that again. Listen to this.
I prepared what I usually would do, sitting down as I did come back with foreign leaders or the National Security Council for explicit detail. And I realized about partway through that, you know, although I get quoted, the New York Times had me down.
Now they went
like
from
10
one
points
thing.
before the debate, 9 now or whatever the hell
Now they
it
went
is.
to the debate.
The fact of the matter is that what I looked at is that he also lied 28
Now they went to
times.
Trump.
I mean, the way the debate ran,
Now he's back at the
not my
debate.
fault, nobody else's.
Nobody's
No one
fault.
else's.
What?
The
First of
guy
all,
is
this is how he
senile.
speaks now. As I
He
did
can't
come
finish
back,
his thought.
national security, he's missing words, many words in his operative sentences. And then in the middle of nowhere, he pivots to, I get quoted, New York Times had me down 10 points, which is untrue. The New York Times prior to the debate had him down 3 or 4, depending on which poll you look at, according to Nate Silver, not 10. Because he's trying to make the point in the middle of that sentence that the debate didn't cost him any points. He says, now I'm down 9. There was no substantive change. That's a lie. It's inaccurate at a minimum. He inserts it in the middle of nowhere. For what purpose? Why? It doesn't flow out of anything after national security. At a minimum, he inserts it in the middle of nowhere. For what purpose? Why? It doesn't flow out of anything after national security advisors, and then goes back to, well, he lied 28 times. And this is like, you can't even follow the logic, the method of thinking, Stu, and all these cognitive experts will tell you this is yet another sign. It's a sign of cognitive abilities starting to shut down.
When I watch him speak, I often think of my 1978 MGB, British car. When you turn the key, a lot of times it does not start. And it makes noise, and it does things that sound like cars running, but it doesn't actually move you in any direction. And that's what it feels like watching him. I mean, it really is disconcerting, realizing this guy is also supposedly negotiating with foreign leaders over major important things. You know, I think the most scary part of this is that, like, you have a night like that debate night, and you realize your entire political life, legacy, career is on the line. You have days to address this and figure out a strategy. And the strategy actually is not the hard part, right? Like, the strategy is obvious. You go out there and you do a bunch of appearances where you look good. And if he were capable of doing that, he would have done it. This was his opportunity to go out there and shine. And look, you know, I'll even judge it on a Joe Biden curve. Like, if every politician, you say 1 to 10 scale, all Joe Biden content falls between like 1 and 3. Like, the best Joe Biden speech ever is a 3 out of 10. I will.
He's never going to be a Josh Hawley.
Right, yeah. If you put in a 2.5, you'd be okay with it. Get to a 3 out of 10, fine. He can't even do this. There are dozens and dozens of highly paid professionals around him realizing what the stakes are for this campaign. All of them are uniquely and completely focused on making this one appearance seem like this man can actually do this job. You got to get through 20 minutes with a guy who is a Clinton operative. And even with that setup, he still fails. And the reason is because he is incapable. That is a remarkable thing to say about the president of the United States.
He can't. I mean, I love it because you've got, I think it's the Philadelphia Inquirer, which is still on Team Biden, saying what he needs to do is a series of town halls and put himself out there for repeated interviews. Hello, McFly. They know that. He's not capable. You're so dumb. Do you think they don't know that? He can't do it. That's why everything has to be controlled, and it can only be given to Morning Joe, and it can only be given to 2 radio hosts who agree to ask the White House questions, and he can only be given to George Stephanopoulos, who was near tears. He was so upset with reeling off the president's approval ratings in the polls and so on. That's why they're doing it that way. The president was asked by Stephanopoulos about whether he will take a cognitive exam. We're going to get into this in detail in 2 minutes. We're going to take a break, and then we're going to get back into the cognitive stuff in depth. But just listen to what he said to Stephanopoulos on that score. It's what is it, Deb? 7, I think.
Do you dispute that there have been more lapses, especially in the last several months?
Can I run the 110th flat? No. but I'm still in good shape.
Are you more frail?
No,
Have you had the specific cognitive tests, and have you had a neurologist, a specialist, do an examination?
no one said I had to. No one said, they said I'm good.
Would you be willing to undergo an independent medical evaluation that included neurological and cognitive tests and release the results to the American people?
Look, I have a cognitive test every single day. Every day I have that test. Everything I do. You know, not only am I campaigning, but I'm running the world.
Would you be willing to have the independent medical evaluation?
Watch me there's a lot of time left in this campaign.
So no, he refuses to submit to an independent medical evaluation. He refuses to have a cognitive exam. And in the course of refusing that, he tells us, I'm not more frail than I was 3.5 years ago. I mean, that's just an absurdity. That I'm in good shape. The polls are not accurate. I'm not behind. And 36 is not my approval rating. Everything's denied or lied about. And I refuse to give you a cognitive test. My God, Dave.
I mean, I guess he did admit that he can't run the 100 in 10 seconds flat. So I mean,
We got that.
At least that's true. Yeah, look, this isn't gonna hold. The other night, my son and I watched Wag the Dog, right? And if you remember in that movie, there's a scandal. The president's up for re-election, and there's like the Firefly girl, and De Niro's character comes in as Mr. Fix-It. David Mamet wrote that movie, and one of the things that's sort of a drumbeat through it is you hear them say there's 2 weeks to the election, there's 9 days to the election, there's 7. And De Niro keeps saying, like, we just got to string this out for 11 more days. We just put them together. We can do this. This is 4 months. This is not going to hold for 4 months. If the election was next week, okay, you could produce a war, right? You could do it. This is not going to hold for 4 months if that's the best that Joe Biden can do. And so it's a hell of a pickle for the Democrats right now, because if he's refusing to leave, I do think they're going to have to, one way or another, remove him, even if it means invoking the 25th Amendment. I think they all know that this is not going to work.
Here was just some of the Democrat reaction to that interview with Stephanopoulos. David Axelrod, CNN contributor and former Obama guy, of course. After Biden says only the Lord Almighty could persuade me to give up this race, he writes, denial, delusion, defiance, Paul Begala, Clinton operative. It will not quell the growing anger. Nothing short of President Biden doing a Simone Biles triple flip with a double twist can make Democrats unsee that debate. Julian Castro, who ran against Biden in 2020 and raised the age issue then, you really see a president in denial and in a bubble. And Nate Silver, who I mentioned a moment ago, the guy to polling, says, I wimped out in today's column and deleted a line saying that he should formulate a plan to transition the presidency to Harris within 30 to 60 days. But I'm there now. Something's clearly wrong here. And goes on to say, you can see in the ladder of being forced out, he's about halfway up. It's got things like back channel conversations about pushing him out, anonymous leaks to the press, influential non-electeds and donors say he should resign. Backbench elected officials say he should resign. Signals from senior party leaders that he should resign with plausible deniability. Mega donors saying he should resign and withholding funds. Normie senators or representatives saying he should resign. All this is starting to happen. You know, Senator Mark Warner of Virginia trying to call this meeting, which has now been bounced to tomorrow. You've got 5 Democrats going into the weekend who openly called in the House for him to step down. Another 6 saying so, or reverse those numbers. 6 going into the weekend, another 5 over the weekend joining the chorus. You've got leaders like Hakeem Jeffries and Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer not saying anything publicly yet, but Pelosi saying we're entitled to answers on whether this is an episode or a condition. You've got top donors like billionaire Rick Caruso saying he is going to pause donations to the Biden campaign and urging Biden to step aside. So you can feel these wheels in motion still. And Politico this morning had a headline saying that several Democrats we spoke to view this Friday as a soft deadline for Biden to prove he's up to the job, lest the effort to force him aside get more aggressive and potentially more humiliating, which is just an absurdity. What's he going to do this week? He's going to do the Simone Biles triple flip, double back. I mean, like, what could he possibly do to satisfy them by Friday. They're waiting for polls. That's what they're waiting for. There was a sliver of good news for Joe Biden in that realm following a devastating New York Times poll that showed him 6 points behind Trump in likely voters, 9 points behind Trump in registered voters. There was a Bloomberg Morning Consult poll showing him having steadied the ship. We can talk about all of that, but I've got to take a break. And when we come back, we're going to get into the fact that it broke over the weekend, not once, not twice, 9 times over the past year. A Parkinson's specialist physician has visited the White House and met with President Biden's personal doctor and potentially with President Biden himself. Not one of these crack reporters covering the White House found this, disclosed it, or reported on it. The New York Post broke the story yesterday. There's been follow-up reporting since, and we went back and took a hard look at every single one of those visits and what, if anything, had happened in the president's world just prior. Wait until you hear this. It was Lenin who said, "Give me 4 years to teach the children, and the seed I have sown will never be uprooted."
We'll be
Well, in
back.
the last 4 years, math and reading skills are on the decline. And let's not forget all the woke steps. That's standard.
All right, we're
protocol.
back.
All the presidents do this. He knows this. Instead, he just blows past them and starts looking around like he's lost.
Well, we're going to end it right there and continue it tomorrow. Everybody have a good night.